Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a legendary game that's known to be a cult classic. A flawed masterpiece, claim the YouTube thumbnails. The crown jewel of the entire IP, claims Paradox Interactive. But what you will not often hear about it is that when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade video games, it was not the first. No, the honor of being first goes to Vampire the Masquerade Redemption from 2000, and that's the game that we're going to be discussing today. It's a BioWare-style party-based game, following the rules of the tabletop in that classic CRPG style, in a way that's honestly vastly different from the solo gameplay loop of Bloodlines. It's October, and that means we're shifting our attention away from Dungeons & Dragons video games and towards a different series of video games based off of the hit TTRPG series, The World of Darkness. Most tabletop gamers will have at least heard of this setting to some degree, but for the PC gamers in my audience, you may not know a whole lot about this IP. Likely you have heard of the 2004 video game Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and you may also have heard that it was based off of a tabletop game by the same name. But what you may not have heard is just how deep this rabbit hole goes, or how influential and grandiose this property was back in its heyday. Vampire the Masquerade and the world of darkness it inspired was messy, crude, and extraordinarily edgy, but it was also sincere in ways that were just intoxicating and contagious. It was a love letter to outcasts. Vampire the Masquerade inspired countless spin-offs from their company White Wolf, from werewolves and their apocalypse to the dark dreams of the changelings. But so too did it inspire countless books, spin-off media, a TV show, and even a real-world teenage vampire cult that murdered their parents. Through covering 3 video games, Werewolf, Vampire, and Wraith, we'll discover all about this intoxicating little system that so entranced the teens of the 1990s. While the connections between these different games can be messy and disconnected and honestly even flat-out contradictory on occasions, the one thing that they can all agree on is this: it was a world of darkness. The story of how we got to Vampire Redemption and its romantic melodrama begins 10 years earlier, at the beginning of the 90s. The great irony of the Satanic Panic's focus on claiming Dungeons & Dragons was encouraging teens to worship the devil and join cults is that they completely failed to pay any attention to the 1991 role-playing game by White Wolf, Vampire the Masquerade. In it, the players don't fight against the darkness as they do in Dungeons & Dragons. Instead, they embrace it, playing as a band of vampires, trying to find their way in the dark and hidden society of the Kindred. The idea came from a simple thought by creator Mark Reinhagen. He wanted to make a vampire game, but he found the idea of playing vampire hunters to be boring. Thus, Vampire the Masquerade was born, and was almost immediately a massive success, finding a target audience that was related, but altogether separate from the geeks that made up the bulk of the D&D audience. Vampire, and the world of darkness that grew around it, became the pastime of choice for an entire generation of goths. From the jump, this IP changed tabletop role-playing games forever, and in so many different ways. This game was probably the great harbinger at the time of simplified rule sets. No longer requiring hours of lecture from the DM to learn how to play, new fans could be up and running far, far quicker. Vampire the Masquerade was based on the Storyteller rule set, upon which all future World of Darkness games would be built as well. And while the actual rules of the Storyteller system are, in retrospect, something that even the most diehard of fans would admit are just not very good, the Masquerade didn't run on combat or crunchy mechanics in the way that old-school D&D did. Thus, lackluster rules weren't necessarily a big problem. This was a system that put narrative and storytelling at the front, with dungeon crawling forced to take a back seat. This storytelling focus granted levels of immersion that many players never quite achieved with Dungeons & Dragons. Plus, whether or not White Wolf intended this to be the case, there is kind of a sympathetic connection between the outcast goths who are playing this game and the brooding vampires forced to seclude themselves from human society. It should be little surprise that Vampire the Masquerade has always had a far greater number of players who chose to take things one step farther and take their game away from the table and play their games as live-action role-playing. In many countries, in fact, Vampire the Masquerade was the inciting event that brought LARP to their nation. In addition to their hobby-shaking contributions to storytelling, streamlining, and LARP, Vampire the Masquerade had one additional legacy that is likely more significant than any of the others. The popularity of Vampire the Masquerade with groups that weren't your traditional 90s and 80s nerd is oft cited as the inciting incident that finally brought women and girls flooding into the role-playing hobby. The exact reason for this is debated. Targeting goths as opposed to geeks in the 90s probably meant that you just innately had more women in your audience. Vampires could have just been a fantasy that better appeals to both genders. The truth is likely a mix of all of the above and even more factors. Women were always there in the hobby, with surveys showing that somewhere around 5% of D&D gamers were girls in the 1970s, yet it was White Wolf who truly succeeded at welcoming women in large numbers into the hobby, both on the ground amongst the player base, but also amongst their writing staff, with 11 of the 28 writers during the original World of Darkness run being women, which was practically unheard of at the time. This was a big stepping stone towards the modern demographics, where 40% of all Dungeons & Dragons players and presumably TTRPG players at large are women. But immediately after the success of Vampire, White Wolf began hungrily spinning off, launching a new game line about different monsters each year. Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, Wraith the Oblivion, Changeling the Dreaming. But then the calendar hit 1996, an auspicious year for this IP, and an important one on the stepping stone towards Vampire Redemption. Yes, this is still a video about this game. Don't worry, the review section is not far off. 1996 is when White Wolf made its play for the mainstream, releasing a Fox drama about the vampire clans of their masquerade, called Kindred the Embraced. In it, a lone detective discovers that the mobster he's been hounding is actually the vampire prince of San Francisco, and the two have to team up to prevent an all-out war between the city's 5 clans. The bad news is that this show only made it 7 episodes before being cancelled, mostly due to the fact that viewers at the time thought it was confusing and difficult to keep track of by 90s standards. But the good news is that the full series is actually up on YouTube at the time of recording. I'll drop a link in the description below if you want to give it a look. But if you're interested in watching it with me, then I'm going to be hosting a watch party for my patrons. The exact date will flash on screen, like right now. So if you're interested in watching this thing with me, as much as I'm interested in watching it with you, then sign up to my Patreon. Then click on one of the links down below to access my Discord event server. And, give me or one of my moderators a ping just to let me know that you're one of the patrons, and we'll get you set up to join the watch party. The next major event in 1996 is one that probably would have gotten the TV series cancelled anyway. While the Satanic Panic mostly passed over White Wolf, they were about to run face first into it with the help of a band of troubled teenagers. Rod Ferrell was a kid with a tough life. His parents had him way too young, and his dad ran off. To make matters worse, court documents claim that his grandfather was abusing him. And, probably abusing him that way. Rod eventually met a group in his small Kentucky town who played Vampire the Masquerade. This group was, it was on the more hardcore end of things, and they were having difficulty discerning the difference between reality and the game. Often they drank each other's blood for real. Every member of their little band had intense scarring up and down their arms from this practice. Rod began to dive farther into the game with this group, and soon lost himself in the fantasy, managing to scare even the coterie that had inducted him. A good parent might have tried to pull their son back and given them some grounding from the delusions, but that's not what Rod's mom did. She began soliciting a 14-year-old boy in the group to embrace her so that she could be a vampire like her son. She was later jailed for this because it's exactly as bad as it sounds. Rod was booted out of this group after killing a cat and eventually fighting the leader of the band. Rod soon forged his own coterie, embracing a group of teenagers, including his girlfriend. The group decided to relocate themselves to New Orleans to be a dark family, but on the way they planned to pick up their friend Heather. Heather and Rod knew each other quite well, but Heather's family didn't think much of the strange goth boy Rod, who was constantly ranting about immortality. Having been forbidden from communicating with each other, Heather angrily overreacted, as teenagers understandably do, telling Rod that her parents were abusing her. All investigation on this case suggests that the parents were not, in fact, abusing her. She was simply upset with them. And, you know, teenagers can be careless with their words. Except, well, she had just told this to Rod Ferrell, an abuse victim who thought he was an immortal killer. So after picking up Heather to join their road trip to New Orleans, Rod and his right-hand man double back and bludgeon Heather's parents to death with a crowbar. Heather didn't know Rod had done this until the police caught up with the vampire family. All were sent to jail, tried as adults for the crime, with Rod given the death penalty at only 16 years of age, though this was later reduced to a life sentence. Heather, on the other hand, was not jailed. Her only crime in the end was not realizing how badly fucked up her friend Rod was. Now, while Vampire the Masquerade did get a mini moral panic after the Vampire Clan murder, the public was already kind of dulled on moral panics against role-playing games after, just going through a decade of them. Plus, many parents didn't actually know what Vampire the Masquerade was, so they just got mad at D&D again, cause that's the same thing, right? Now all of this, getting a TV series, the effect on the teenage psyche, shows you just how powerful of an IP Vampire is. But none of these spin-offs ever really reached the same level of success. Werewolf and Mage were popular enough to justify their existence, but titles like Wraith and Changeling didn't get that much traction. Vampire was always the star of the World of Darkness, and really was the cash cow that allowed the rest of the thing to even exist. So, with new spin-offs failing over and over, White Wolf took things in a different direction, producing a Vampire the Masquerade spin-off called Dark Ages, which serves as a prequel to the setting. Whereas the base Vampire the Masquerade is set in the modern day and has most clans working together to serve greater organizations like the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and the Anarchs, Dark Ages is set in a time before those pesky humans were strong enough to really threaten vampire society. There is no Camarilla, and there is no need for one, because there truly are no rules in vampire society. There are only the 13 clans, and the constant war between them for the control of the medieval world. And it is this setting that Vampire the Masquerade Redemption is set, at least in part. Because the great selling point of this game is that this is a story in two parts. You begin as a vampire in the Dark Ages, and then at the halfway point, the story shifts to allow you to play as the same vampire 900 years later in the year 1999. And this is an exciting concept. For a story like this, a tale of revenge stretching across 1,000 years is one that can only be told with the gothic melodrama of a world of darkness. If you're enjoying the video so far, then why not consider subscribing to the channel? I review all sorts of video games that are related to tabletop franchises. Usually this takes the form of Dungeons & Dragons video games, and sometimes Warhammer. Covering the World of Darkness kinda comes with a big risk, cause YouTube doesn't really like it when I talk about stuff that's not D&D video games. And now I hate to hold it over people's heads, but if this video bombs, I probably just can't financially afford to keep talking about the World of Darkness. So if you want to help me give this thing the best chance of success it's got, please hit the like button. And leave me a comment down below about your favorite vampire clan. I appreciate the help, and I'm really hoping the algorithm continues to let me talk about World of Darkness, because I like it. Okay, enough delay. I should talk about the actual video game now, shouldn't I? Today's handsome bachelor is Christophe Romuald, a young crusading Frenchman. His personality can largely be summed up as... Christophe turned the tide of battle against a horde of pagans in Moravia, being gravely wounded by an arrow in the process. He returns to the world of the living a few days later, his crusading brothers having moved on. He's been attended to by a nun named Sister Anezka, and as you can see, They kinda like each other. That night, a strange monster attacks Anezka and the other nuns, and the wounded Kristoff springs to action. Afterwards, we're given the choice to go save the day, or, maybe in like 5 more minutes or 2 months or something, some sleep might be nice. Now look, the only thing I know about Kristoff thus far is... So therefore, we plunge headlong into an infested silver mine just outside the city. After hacking apart countless schlachtas and a war ghoul, we are confronted with a horrifying vampiress from Clan Simitsi. Hello, my name is Professor Sycamore Redwood Douglas Fir, and I'm here to wish you a warm welcome to the amazing world of Vampimon. From here on out, when you encounter a new clan of vampires, I'll update your Vampidex so you know who these wonderful creatures are. For example, Clan Simitsi is known as a Flesh Shaper type clan, strong against humans whom they dismiss as lesser. They excel at torture and the scaring of low-income Transylvanians. And yes, that's right, that means that Dracula himself was a Tsimitsi. Now, let's get back to the Tsimitsi at hand.
Out, blaspheming wretch! Taste the steel of righteousness!
We return to Prague as a hero, receiving lavish praise for our deeds. We also sneak in a little bit of flirtation, but we are immediately scolded for being too much of a heartthrob.
Such thoughts are evil! Thy concupiscence damns thy soul and dooms Aneska!
As penance, we're sent to patrol the streets at night to clear out yet more demons, who are strangely not appearing any less, despite the fact that we cleared out the mine. Upon doing so, Kristoff, being so hot and desirable, finally catches up to him. Every vampire clan in the city is hoping to embrace the talented killer to strengthen their own standing. Our boy pours his heart out to Anezka, and they both narrowly avoid breaking Anezka's oath.
May God have mercy upon my soul, for the devil has just placed into my heart the most impure of notions.
Kristoff tears himself away and starts walking pretty strangely down the street. We are soon accosted by one of the elders of a clan looking to expand their numbers.
Now come to me. I am the mother of thy rebirth.
I know thy ways, demon, and I have lore enough to kill thee.
Nay, thou art helpless in my hands as a naked babe.
Nay! Oh, nay!
Kristoff awakens days later in his new home, the clan sanctuary of the Bruja.
God have mercy on my soul. I am damned.
Although immediately fearing for his soul, he has little choice but to hear them out. His new patriarch, the vampire who embraced him, is Ekaterina. What little comfort she can offer him is that he's now part of a clan that actually does have visions for a better world, where both kin and kine stand as equals. The Bruja trace their ancestry back to the ancient city of Carthage, which in World of Darkness lore was a city of rough equality between mortals and vampires. It was shattered, just as in our world, by Rome, and the soil was salted by Clan Ventru, that the Bruja dream would never live again. Ekaterina and her circle are part of a sect of Bruja called the Prometheans, and are devoted to bringing the ideals of Carthage back into the world. Anyways, Kristoff is moping about his damnation and the fate of his eternal soul. His new brother in blood, Wilhelm, ein deutscher Vampir, decides to cheer him up by bringing us on a mission. You see, Clan Cappadocian, a clan friendly to the Bruja, has recently stolen important documents from Ekaterina. We are tasked with slaying as many Cappadocians as required to retrieve them, so long as we don't harm the head Cappadocian. Now, having access to vampire disciplines, a blood pool, and a second character, this is a good time to start digging into the gameplay. This is certainly in the BioWare school of CRPGs, but still a world apart due to its differing game system. Nevertheless, it's quite intuitive, and there is a staggering number of disciplines to choose from. In the end, not all that many of them are very useful though, so there's a limit on how many ways you can effectively build your character. After playing with it for a while, I chose to specialize Kristoff into being my blood drinker. The stunning of foes and the drinking of their blood is really kinda micro-heavy, so it just seemed logical to me to have my main character be the one to do it, then giving the blood away to my companions to keep them topped up on the lovely red mana. There does seem to be a few bugs though. We're instructed to never kill people when we feed, and that it will awaken our inner beast. But it's pretty much unavoidable that you'll accidentally do it from time to time, and nothing bad ever actually happens. Your frenzy doesn't increase, your humanity doesn't drop, so unless I'm missing something, I don't think they ever actually implemented that mechanic. While the gameplay as a whole does work, Vampire the Masquerade was never meant to be all that combat-oriented. But this game is, and to a surprising degree. It was apparently an in-joke, according to a few forum users, that the reason there are so few vampires in the modern day compared to the distant past is because Christoph killed them all. Vampire just isn't meant to be a huge, great combat slog. It's meant to have role-playing at the front and center. But for what it's worth, Redemption isn't too awful of a combat fest. It's not obscenely difficult, and while the dungeons are just a little bit too long and too samey, we're nowhere near intolerable levels of either. And for that matter, for a BioWare-style game, it's really quite linear. There's not much in the way of choice, mainly differing dialogues that can raise or lower your humanity, this affecting which armor you can use and which endings you have access to. None of this detracts, however, from the game's biggest strength, its atmosphere. The story does have some structural problems for reasons I'll explain later, but it always manages to feel good to just be Christoph. Anyway, we find the Cappadocian thief, a young protege who was acting without orders. We slay him to retrieve the stolen goods. Wilhelm allows us a quick visit with Inezka so we can get our head in the game. But this was only after literally every other Promethean told Christoph that this was an awful idea. And frankly, me, William SRD, I'm agreeing, it was a bad idea. Christoph tells Inezka of his fate, and the brave girl swears to us that she shall not rest until she's found a cure for Christoph. We then have another task to do before we can call it a morning. We head into a Jewish neighborhood to stop the frenzied golem that the renegade Cappadocian from earlier had sicked on them. The community is saved, and the head Cappadocian makes his appearance. He's saddened by the bloodshed, but he is glad to be rid of the troublemaker. As an apology for all of this, he sends his daughter Serena off with us to serve Clan Bruja. Anyway, we sleep through the day and some time passes. We are overcome by a dream that Inezka was attacked by Christoph and then fed upon. Christoph goes to check up on her and indeed finds her bedchambers in the abbey to be empty. Reporting into Ekaterina, we are informed that Inezka gave the Prometheans a note, forsaking her oaths as a nun, so that she may instead try to save Christoph from damnation. Her location is unknown, but she's presumed missing. Many Bruja and their allies have also been disappearing lately, and Christoph is tasked with helping them investigate, hoping to find Inezka with them. Ekaterina takes us to the Ventru prince of the city, Rudolf Brandl. Now, we're Bruja, so he hates us, and he's part of the clan that burned Carthage down, so we hate him right back. But he is still the prince, and that means we have to give him some respect, and he has to keep the peace and not let vampires get kidnapped left and right in his city. He will tell us what happened if we do him a favor and steal a relic. To get to this relic, we have to prowl through Nosferatu tunnels below the city. The game forces us to learn about niche abilities that help us see our enemies when they go invisible. Failure to utilize these abilities means that we're going to be paying for it in major amounts of attrition, and difficulty keeping the party's blood levels above the bare minimum. It's a good little section, and soon we have the relic for that Ventru trash. He redirects us to the man who has been rounding up Bruja, a freaky little Tremere named Arden. As we raid his secret base, we free a gangrel named Eric, who agrees to come with us and complete our little party of 4. The Tremere are a new clan, and are ecstatic about trying out their new magic on us, but we do in the end make it to Ardan. He's a little creep, with all the tact of a disgusting little brother who's telling you about these dirty magazines he's obsessed with, except his obsession is Inezka. However, Arden wasn't much on the vampiric totem pole, and he wasn't actually allowed to embrace the captive nun. The story of what he did about the situation is both convoluted and muddled, but in the end we find out that she was sent in a slave caravan led by a man named Orsi and headed to Vienna. "You're absolutely not going to Vienna," says Ekaterina. The Bruja have no presence there, and she's definitely not going to waste talented Prometheans like Kristoff on an impossible task. But you know what? Ekaterina may be our patriarch, but she's not my real mom.
Brazen brat.
On the way, I reflect a little bit on the game so far, and especially on the presentation of all this. Now, don't be fooled by how bad the textures are by today's standards. This was top of the line in 2000. One outlet at the time even called it the best looking RPG ever made. While this is obviously subjective, it's true that Redemption had a wonderful intersection of gothic art direction and cutting-edge graphical tech. It was well ahead of its BioWare peer, Baldur's Gate 2, and BioWare wouldn't catch up to Redemption graphically until probably at least Neverwinter Nights 2002, but more defensively Coder in 2003. And even then, BioWare wasn't definitively beating Redemption's graphics until Jade Empire in 2005, after our boy Kristoff had finished up his adventure for a full half-decade. The voice acting was also excellent, with all the leads sounding perfect and delivering their gothic Shakespearean believably.
I shall discharge my life boon by accompanying the brave Bruja, who pried open the jaws of the Tremere trap and released poor Eric.
Where Kristoff goes, Serena goes. Mayhap 4 shall prevail where 1 cannot.
Our party arrives, Vienna, Österreich. I will be brief about our little journey over here, cause it's quite short. Orsi, another greedy Ventru, agrees to tell us where Inezka is if we pay him off with a favor because these damned Ventru are all the same. We help him kill a priest turned vampire, which is a pretty cool dungeon because we have to do it during the day. It's stick to the shadows or get burned. In the end, Orsi does not keep his promise, and he throws us into the prison of the Teutonic Knights. Fortunately, Serena is able to get us out due to how careless the Teutons are with their trash. We know enough after all this to know that the caravan Orsi led went to another group of Tremere in this city called the Dihexi. We raid the estate and find their leader, Etrius. Unfortunately, the powerful elder warps Eric's body and we're forced to slay him. Afterwards, we rain vengeance down upon the proud vampire lord, and in the end he's absolutely humiliated and surrenders to avoid further shame.
I have suffered the maddening serenity of the dying salute, but I will not suffer further indignity at the hands of a fledgling Bruja and his ragtag brigade.
What he tells us is the worst possible news. The slave caravan never actually reached Vienna. The Tzimisce raided it just outside of Prague. Inezka never even left the city. Prague is much changed when we return. Months or weeks have likely passed on the round trip south. Ekaterina has made her power play to take the city for the Prometheans. With our coterie touring Austrian wine country, our patriarch needed to be clever with her tactics to unseat the Ventru and the local Tzimisce. She managed to rile up all the local humans in a great witch hunt, slaughtering Prince Brandel and surrounding the Tzimisce in Viscerad Castle. Inezka is in all likelihood locked in with the flesh-tearing vampire clan, and has been for some time. The castle and its denizens are nightmares to behold, but they're no match for our talented little party of fellows. We learn that the lord of this castle is a long-exiled Tzimisce Methuselah named Vukodlak. He's bad even by their standards, which is why he's been exiled to Prague instead of living in the Carpathian heartlands. He schemed to gather enough power to one day prevent Gehenna, which is the vampire apocalypse. In the Gehenna, the 13 vampires who the clans descend from, also known as the Antediluvians, will rise and drain their descendants dry so that they may begin again. Vukodlak's plan is simple. Drain the Antediluvians dry and become the unparalleled god among the kindred. But this was a bit too ambitious for his clan. So they locked him up here, slumbering in eternal torpor. But on this day of all days, he can finally wake up, with the assistance of this lovely nun he captured and turned into a ghoul. Before Kristoff can snap her out of it, the ceiling collapses, burying the would-be god, and also our coterie.
work, brother. I'll alert Father Alatius that it's arrived. Then we can open it.
Christoph, arise. Thou art in grave danger.
1999. Though, I suppose not the 1999 that I remember. Christoph awakens to find that the world was not as he last saw it. He was buried in stasis, in torpor for centuries. When next he wakes, it's in a strange lab, surrounded by artifacts excavated from Viscerad Castle. Something, or someone, has called Christoph back from his slumber. But finding out who is a task for later. More importantly, standing before our confused and starving crusader is a man who claims to be a vampire hunter. Which is the wrong thing to say to a livid and starving 900-year-old elder vampire.
Back off, sucker! I'm sending you to hell!
My name is Christoph Romuald. I was a man of God and a soldier in heaven's cause. I am now outcast of heaven, and not even a man. I am kindred. I am a vampire.
The Vampires and Their Society of Leopold is a really fun segment. Not only is it great to be the dark creature that you never should have woken up, but it's also fascinating to see random clutter and objects that we recognize from our medieval journeys positioned as though they're artifacts of study. It's a pretty well-placed link between past and present, and it really shows off just how much the world has changed. Christoph is able, against all odds, to glean some information from the scattered computers, even without grandchildren to call for help. It seems that Ekaterina's little power play in Prague has had some unintended consequences over the centuries. These humans she tricked into helping her kill Ventru and Tzimisce suddenly realized that it's possible for them to kill vampires if they team up, which was probably not the lesson we meant them to take from this. These now experienced hunters passed around their knowledge and assisted in founding a large number of orders of vampire slayers that were eventually merged together into the Inquisition. That meant that our actions in Viscerad were some of the pivotal events that led to vampires no longer being capable of acting in the open. The world has changed. It is now humans who rule the world of darkness. Terminals in the Society Lodge remark that the Tzimisce excavated much of the castle as well, and have been moving vast quantities of the soil from the site through London, where we now are. Our only lead is that the followers of Set are involved, but that's about all we've got to go off of. We head out the doors and into the streets of London, and Christoph realizes that he probably shouldn't run around looking like a vengeful monster for very long. A guy attempts to mug us, and we allow him to live in exchange for a change of clothes he's carrying in his gym bag. We have gone from Dark Crusader to pissed off Revenant to, I don't know, somebody's dad? In efforts to link back up with Kindred Society, we find a vampire bar. We are fortunate enough to meet a descendant of Clan Bruja there. But they're certainly not the type of vampires that Christoph used to be accustomed to. Pink is a London punk to his core, and he thinks that our archaic ass is just about the funniest thing he's ever seen.
You must be a fossil!
The Prometheans are all long dead, he explains, and without them, the Bruja have become lost. The spirit of anger and rebellion at a society gone wrong is pretty much all they've got left. There are no more lofty ambitions or visions of utopia, just the burning rage of anger at the world. Most of the clans in this modern era have put aside their differences and come together to form an organization called the Camarilla, which exists to enforce a masquerade which keeps Kindred Society hidden from mortals. Which is interesting in this game. With base Vampire the Masquerade being set in the modern day, the Camarilla is the status quo, and old clan rivalries from centuries before are the weird foreign wrench in the system. This game sets it up with the reverse being true. We are the ones coming into this with all the clan rivalries. Work with the Tremere? Those slaving fucks who took Inezca? The Ventru who never helped us without asking the impossible in return? Regardless, we pour our heart out to Pink, which definitely shouldn't be this funny.
Christoph Romuald, once of the Order of the Sword Brethren, once a Promethean Bruja, and now I know not what.
Pink agrees to help us and points us to a brothel that the Setites we're looking for are using as a front. But first, he helps us access an arms seller, desperately trying to convince us to stop using a damned sword. Fool! This is the Einkorn blade! Its edge has tasted the blood of hundreds! Now, take me to yon modern blacksmith! Strange men in vans truly are the artisans of our time. With Pink better armed, on my dime, and Kristoff now equipped with some reasonable modern armor, we head out to infiltrate the followers of Set. At the front, we find a Toreador vampiress named Lily, who is not there of her own free will. Honestly, it was one of the biggest plot twists in the game when she opens her mouth and the voice of Tara Strong falls out.
I'm from Clan Toreador.
Prove it. Who are Cry Cry Cry?
You mean the American band Cry Cry Cry? Aren't they that acoustic trio that even though they're all songwriters only does covers of songs by other groups and performs the most depressing?
Enough! She's a Tory, all right.
She offers to help us if we assist her in breaking her bond to the Setite leader, Lucretia. The Toreador are one of the only clans that didn't massively fuck over Kristoff in the Middle Ages, so we happily agree to help. We soon sneak into the Setite temple beneath the brothel and begin to do as Kristoff does best. At the final lair we find the leader who, okay, let's just admit it, tragically was designed in the year 2000 and thus missed the dawn of the cosplay age by about 10 years. She refuses to help us and we're forced to kill her. It doesn't stick though, because Setites like to follow lit rules by cutting out their own hearts and storing them in a safe place. We have to backtrack and reach the Tower of London to get her fleshy phylactery. It's honestly a filler dungeon, especially when the devs could have just hid Lucretia's heart somewhere in the Setite temple. We return to Lucretia, threaten her, and then give her her heart back.
Pink, thou shalt return her heart.
Okay. Yeah.
What? She, of course, still betrays us. Before she died, Lucretia told us of a shipping vessel that the Giovanni family has been using to smuggle this Viscerad dirt in, and the boat is headed to New York, New York. The modern day has been quite fun so far, and the whole time skipped has been delivered excellently. In particular, I find the dialogue to be a really strong aspect of this. It seems strange at first that the medieval era fully committed to all the doths and the thous and etc., but seeing it contrasted with the modern day has been such a nice and immersive touch. We immediately feel the difference in the people we're speaking to, and we get this lovely contrast as Kristoff still speaks in soliloquies, and Pink replies with, "You fucking what, mate?" Our medieval ass departs London on the cargo ship, and we discover a group of Interpol agents who've been slaughtered by some Nosferatu. I love the modern Nosferatu, by the way. They're like demonic guys who wear like obey hats and crap. It's incredible. We steal the IDs of the Interpol agents, and Lily is able to adjust them to look like us. Thus, when we get off the boat, we link up with our FBI contact. He's about to raid the Giovanni base where the Viscerad excavation stuff has been shipped, but he won't let us in on the raid. We pivot and commit to learning where the Giovanni base is on our own. The only ones who seem to know are the FBI, so we've got to get at their computer. We rescue a Nosferatu named Samuel, who's a lot less into Ed Hardy than his peers. He joins our party and directs us to a Malkavian hacker. The hacker sends us into the sewers to get at an access point below ground that he can use to infiltrate the FBI computer. The tunnels, like the ones we remember from Prague centuries ago, are filled to the top with Nosferatu, but this time they work for the Sabbat. We know from Pink that the Sabbat are a faction that rejects the Masquerade and the rules of the Camarilla. They're probably not explicitly evil by vampire standards, as they're mainly about not pretending to be something they aren't, but they're certainly evil by human standards, no longer maintaining rules about killing mortals or keeping hidden. Kristoff doesn't like them much because he's pretty attached to his humanity, so we get in another round of vamp hunting and slay the dreaded Underprince and his albino alligators. Now connected to the network, we track the FBI raid and follow them to the Giovanni hideout, who, much to the agent's surprise, are all vampires. They're a tough group, being the stronger inheritor of the now extinct clan Cappadocian we were allied with in the past. The boss deems this conflict to be unprofitable, so he's prepared to tell us everything. But before he gets the chance, Pink kills him. Kristoff is understandably confused and angry that Pink just sabotaged our whole investigation. But a familiar face, straight from the history books, emerges from a shadow to explain.
Because Pink is a liar and an assassin.
Wilhelm, God hath blessed me with thy return.
Kristoff, you can't trust Pink. He's an assassin from Clan Assamite.
Accusations are thrown out, Wilhelm telling us that Pink is an Assamite agent, hired by the Tzimisce to throw us off the trail of Vukodlak. Pink counters with the fact that Wilhelm is an agent of the Sabbat. Wilhelm says, yeah, this is true, and Kristoff is not happy about it. A small number of Prometheans are still alive, and they don't share the goals of the Camarilla. The rules of the Masquerade were put in place to cultivate a separate vampire society that is hidden from humanity, but ultimately lording over as much of it as they can. The Prometheans, however, haven't given up on their dream of a perfect society of kine and kin as conscious equals. They've thrown in with the Sabbat for now, but it's an alliance of convenience, and they certainly don't agree with the Sabbat's latest scheme of waking up Vukodlak to fulfill his 1,000-year-old doomsday plan. Pink finally drops his accent and mocks us before making his escape. It's a painful betrayal. I love the dynamic between he and Kristoff. But Wilhelm is here instead, and Ekaterina has instructed him to assist us in preventing the rise of the Great Methuselah once more. Our investigation hasn't fully dead-ended, however, and we stumble across a note remarking on how profitable the dirt shipments have been with Orsi Industries. That miserable fuck. Today is New Year's, and the millennia shall turn over into Y2K. This is the day that Vukodlak shall rise. Orsi Corp is a breeze after all we've been through, and soon we've finally got that wretched Ventru by the throat. We're too late, he informs us. The ritual has already begun. We make good on a 9-century-old promise of revenge. And Orsi's daughters, ashamed, tell us how to find Vukodlak's Cathedral of Flesh. We rush to the church basement where the Methuselah has been psychically orchestrating his awakening. And here she is. After all this time, Anezka is alive. Kristoff thought that it must have been her that woke him for the task.
Is this true, Anezka?
Dear master, please allow me to split Kristoff's joints and fleshcraft his bones into a throne for thy glory.
This is where the big choice of the game comes up. There are 3 endings, each available to you depending on how much of Kristoff's humanity is intact. I was human as hell, so I only had access to the good ending, in which I reject Vukodlak's demands that I join him on his quest to drain the antediluvians.
One antediluvian is no better than 13. I cannot entrust such power unto any, let alone thee.
We skirmish with the creature before he dismisses us, casting us down into the bowels of his rotten church. But this Cathedral of Flesh was not built by the Methuselah's own hands. How could it be? He was asleep. No, this place was built by Anezka, every decaying victim fused to the walls by her hand. And down here is where she locked her darkest memories, those parts of herself that she could not afford her master to see. We learn that she fought hard to resist, but her body was not in her control. The wicked Tzimisce took great pleasure in turning the nun into a murderer and a sadist. After a century as a ghoul, she found only one thing she could do to resist: trick him into thinking she'd given in. She did his dirty work willingly, defiling her soul as she killed the innocent and built them into a cathedral for her master. But she sabotaged him in ways that he wasn't prepared to counter. She knew that he was a jealous, narcissistic creature and took full advantage of this flaw by whispering suspicions in his ear about every competent minion and operative that served him, delaying his rise by centuries as he repeatedly purged his ranks of anyone useful. Likewise, she elevated idiots like Orsi. Her crown jewel was when she convinced the Methuselah to abandon the old world entirely, spending centuries transferring his base of operations to America. Her great game couldn't last forever though, and when she could no longer delay the awakening, she did the only thing she could: waking Kristoff from his slumber. The one who thwarted Vukodlak in the Dark Ages was the only man who could hope to stop him now. We ascend back to the main chamber, content this time in our knowledge that the real Anezka is still alive within the ghoul. Vukodlak at last stops playing with his food, shifting into his combat form to attack us. Fortunately, Kristoff has grown powerful in his bloody disciplines, and I'm able to stunlock the giant and win the battle once and for all. Anezka was a ghoul, not a vampire, so with the death of her master, she doesn't have long to live. She tells Kristoff that she's sorry, but Kristoff rightfully admits that this was truthfully all his fault. And I remind all of you that he's completely correct. Everyone told him to not go hang out with Anezka as a vampire, 'cause look what happens! Still clinging to her faith after all these years, Anezka presumes herself damned after all that she's done to survive. There is one solution, however, to stave off final death.
Anezka, my accursed soul trembles to utter these selfish, blasphemous words. But thou need not die if thou wouldst endure.
Thou would still have me, Kristoff? I scarcely dared hope.
Thy love has redeemed me across 1,000 years. I would that I could offer salvation in return, but I have none to give, only damnation.
Damnation with thee would be sweet as salvation. Let thy love cast me down and raise me up forever. Take me, my love.
This was a pretty neat game. The story was fun, even if the story structure was a bit of a mess. This thing was written by a tabletop designer, and it shows. The plot feels like a 4-part tabletop role-playing game campaign where you buy a standalone book for each segment. Well, overall, I would say that the narrative of this game is, in the positives. The pacing is all over the place. Nevertheless, it's an easy recommend for me. I'm already itching to replay it sometime and have Kristoff be rebuilt as a pure caster. I didn't expect much from a small and mostly forgotten game like Vampire Redemption, but I was so surprised at how good it was. But while much of the gaming world forgot about this 2000 title, White Wolf has not. The current incarnation of the IP is owned by Swedish developer Paradox Interactive, who are best known for their grand strategy titles like Stellaris, Hearts of Iron, and Europa Universalis. With this in mind, they've taken a wide approach to the IP, clearly taking some cues from Games Workshop in the way that they aim to build the franchise as a multimedia operation. And these many media spin-offs, podcasts, video games, novels, new editions of the tabletop, they haven't forgotten where the World of Darkness began. And they've not forgotten a piece of early spin-off media like Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. Kristoff and Ekaterina have reappeared numerous times over the years, with both being notable characters in the visual novel games that have been coming out recently. We also have confirmation that Serena survived both the collapse of Viscerod and the fall of House Cappadocia. She's mentioned briefly in a sourcebook as now belonging to Clan Hecata. And this leads into one of the game's other legacies. Look, this is an old Vampire the Masquerade game. You didn't think there weren't going to be mods, did you? Age of Redemption is probably the most popular and important one. It quashes bugs, implements missing mechanics, and if you want, it optionally adds Serena back to the game as a 1999 companion, since, we know she's confirmed alive. And the best part, Age of Redemption reportedly managed to set things up so that you can run the main campaign with some friends as a co-op game. I'll drop a link to the mod down below. The other big thing to talk about is how a team of modders are actually remaking this game in the Skyrim engine. The project is called Redemption Reawakened. I'll drop a link to their YouTube channel if you want to follow the development. It looks quite well done, even if I'm a bit skeptical of the change from party-based RPG to, Skyrim. Still, I had a great time with this game. Please consider helping to support the channel via Patreon. I'm looking to move to a new place soon, with better internet, so I can stream my playtests for all of you. It's still a bit tricky financially though, so if I can get my Patreon up to 300 or 400 Canadian a month, then this plan gets to be a lot more realistic. So if you want to follow along live as I check most of these old games out, please consider signing up alongside all these lovely people. Next time, we're going to be checking out Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, a game that has existed in various forms and been repeatedly cancelled for 2 decades. I think it's a good lead to talk about how the World of Darkness has progressed in the years since the 90s. Cheers, everybody. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you soon.